Well, welcome to Stone Cottage Adventures. There's some construction going on, and I'm trying to avoid the saw, but somebody's sawing. Anyway, this is azalea season, and I am stepping out my bedroom door, and you can see the azaleas beginning to bloom. And I'm going to show you several things that bloom this time of year. And over here, some beautiful azaleas here. So stepping down, I have a nice place to sit out here because I love enjoying the flowers. There's a beautiful salmon colored azalea, which looks really pretty next to the akuba. And I'm going to take you in a little bit closer here. This is the Carolina allspice. In general, I'm not real crazy about dark blossoms because they just don't show. But they are often very interesting. And this particular plant has blossoms all over it. And right next to a couple of azaleas here. So this one's more of a purplish pink, and then back there a little more orangey pink coming on back there. Now right here is the rhododendron. Now azaleas are in the rhododendron family, but in my experience the azalea blooms first, the rhododendron blooms second. And down here, since this is our shade garden, the hostas. And again, because when things are shady, that pop of lightness really makes them stand out, like these variegated leaves on this particular hosta. Now, the thing you have to remember about a garden is not everything blooms at once. And if you're going to have perennials, you need to have a wide variety if you want to have something blooming all the time. And the hostas will bloom later in the summer. In a few weeks, this is my clematis, and it's already beginning to get some little blossoms on it, and it too will bloom. And here's another azalea. 2 weeks ago it had like one little blossom on it, and now it has several of them. And right next to it is a pretty deeply shaded spot which has a sedum, which is not the greatest thing for shade, but it works, and vinca, and some ferns. And the ferns are really pretty in the deep shade. And back over here is the epimedium, which is no longer blooming. Now, if we see a little blue flower blooming now, it's no longer a Virginia bluebell. It is now a Spanish bluebell. And you're going to see a lot of those in just a moment. Now here's our little dining area. And I don't know if you noticed this or not, that St. Francis statue has been there all along, but it's been black. And I just got out a little chalk paint. For years I have meant to paint him a little bit lighter so he would show up. So he's showing up quite nicely now. I'm kicking myself for not having done that sooner. Now in the middle of the table I just had a pot that I put some astilbe in. I bought 3 astilbe that I'm going to have my husband plant in a bit, but needed something to go on the table. The annuals are not really in. They're just barely starting to come in, and I haven't seen any begonias yet. And that's what I'm waiting for. That does well in my shade garden. And there is honeysuckle blooming pretty profusely there. More azaleas over here, and this is where our daffodils were, but the daffodils are gone. They are no longer blooming. That's the way it works in a garden like this. Oh, I'm going to back up just a little bit because I showed you before the Solomon's seal, which is wonderful in a shade garden. And there they are, blooming quite nicely here. And 2 weeks ago there was minimal there. A month ago there was nothing. There was a totally blank spots. They pop up and do really well, but you kind of have to get down low to see the blossoms. And there's the bleeding heart and some ferns. And these are some irises that will bloom in several weeks. And on the trellis, some clematis that will come on. And there's some azaleas that are just beginning to pop out. This will look really spectacular in a few days. And this flowering quince has been going for months, and they're starting to look a little sad now, but they still have a little color. Now I'm going to give you a close-up of this Carolina allspice. Now the description of it talks about crushing it, and then it has a wonderful smell. Maybe there's something wrong with my nose, but I don't really smell it that much, but I do think it's a very interesting plant that's blooming. More of the flowering quince. Now over here, that is a bunch of Virginia bluebells, which I'm sorry, not Virginia bluebells, Spanish bluebells, which are absolutely beautiful. And next to that, the ajuga is purple. And last week I showed you the little lily of the valley, and there they are blooming. Wonderful fragrances, again kind of weedish, but very pretty. Now this up here is my burning bush. There are his flowers. Not real spectacular. But what this bush is wonderful at is fall color. Just this beautiful, deep pinkish red. It's really, really pretty. So we'll see him later in the fall when things cool off. And I have got more of that Carolina allspice over there. This blooms like crazy. There's some dogwood blooming here. And you know what's interesting is to look at the different layers in a shade garden. And here is our ancient oak tree, probably 250 years old. And it's the top layer. And then you have the trees that are medium height, like the dogwood tree. Or we have a crepe myrtle and a red bud, different trees. And then down lower, you can see there is that lilac that blooms in the spring and again in the fall. And then back behind it, behind here, another azalea just beginning to pop out. Now here in the front, this is going to be our summer color. There's two different types, a mophead hydrangea and a lace cap hydrangea. And there are some daylilies here. Those will bloom later. And if you notice, if you're looking closely, the vinca blooms are completely gone. And here is another little bulb of some variety. over here, underneath my bedroom window, this is the fothergilla. Last week it was all fuzzy and cute looking. It's no longer very interesting at the moment. But like the burning bush, this is going to give us some beautiful fall color. And well, here's some bleeding hearts down there. And right next to it, barely starting to come out, is the Virginia sweet spire. Let me see if I can get a little better lighting situation so you can just begin to see the little blossoms that are going to be on that. And they last better. The fothergilla does not last very well. This lasts a little bit better, and it also gives good fall color. And here's some more azaleas. You know, it's kind of odd. Azaleas sort of bloom from the inside out. So inside the bush, we're getting some blossoms. Here are, I guess those are Spanish bluebells. They're kind of pink in color, but a different type of bluebell. And over here, we're getting the peonies. I need to do a little more staking on them to make sure they don't get floppy when they bloom, but you can see a lot of flower heads, early summer blooms. And crepe myrtle there. Ah, here we go. You can see the dogwood blooms. Again, very, very high, so they show better from a distance. Up close, they're not as good to see. And there is one last little forsythia. This was covered with the yellow blossoms a month ago, and now pretty well spent. I think I'm going to do some pretty serious trimming on this to give more sunlight down here. Now here is the bleeding heart. A lot of bleeding heart, and these are going to be our daylilies. The Asiatic lilies that'll come early in the summer. And all of these are the Virginia sweet spire. If you live near me and you want a Virginia sweet spire, you can come dig one out of my yard. Dig a dozen of them out of my yard. They're everywhere. They do tend to blossom pretty freely. Now, I've been reading. This is always my azalea that blooms the last. So he is not blooming at the moment. And his blooms don't tend to open up very well. I've been reading. I've got plenty of blossoms. I'm going to try giving it a lot of water. They say sometimes if it's not getting enough water, the blossoms might not open up as well. So I'm going to see if that will solve our problem this year. There's a peony bloom. And there's our last little tulip. I think he's the last one in the garden. Nandina. And there's our fountain. Some ferns. I do potted ferns that stay pretty all winter long too. And the white there, those are the snowflakes, and you can see they're pretty well spent. There are a few little blossoms on there, but they make these little blobs, these little balls that hang down. And tucked in there are some hostas, and the bulbs will die back, and I'll pull them out, and the hostas will fill in. And here is oh, is that stock? Oh, I can't remember. What I do remember is they bloom on the tips. So if this time of year you come in and pinch them back, they will fork, and I'll get twice as many blooms. So that's one of my chores for this week, is to trim back that blossom. This is my monk's hood, which is already almost 3 feet tall. Ferns coming up. And a little bit of vinca down there and some Spanish bluebells. And I am beginning to plant my little window boxes. That one's just a little wall container. I really like coleus for the shade, and I choose colors that will show, and that kind of chartreuse color really pops nicely. And here we're going to head to the front. This is another burning bush, and you can see the little blossoms on there. And the forsythia. Here's our May apple. Now, I showed you this before. A little shy blossom on the May apple. And that's what they look like. And when you see a pair of them right at the little crotch of the two, that's where the bloom will occur. So if I have a single leaf, no blossom. A pair, a blossom. And you really have to kind of look for these because they're hidden down. See, there's a single leaf and no blossom. So those are the May apples. And here is our acanthus, which is a wonderful perennial with a beautiful leaf. Adds a lot of textural interest, and it will have a spire-like blossom on it. More ajuga, the tail end of the pulmonaria. More of the lily of the valley. I think that white flower is Star of Bethlehem, but it is a very invasive weed, and I tend to cut it out as much as possible. And back here is a rose of Sharon, which will bloom later in the summer. And that's the tail end of the bridal wreath spirea. And there is our oak leaf hydrangea, and there's my neighbor's beautiful dogwood tree. Again, from a distance they just show better, and she has a beautiful azalea in her yard too. And coming towards the front of the house, there are lilacs. If you were here, you'd certainly smell those. And then what's going to bloom after that? After the lilacs pass, then we're going to have the you can see the little buds. Right there, little buds. Those are going to be the mock orange, which beautiful white flower. And this is my favorite stand of the Spanish bluebells. Really, really pretty grouping there. And those two things standing up behind them, those are the allium. And in between the allium was a tulip that's spent. So things bloom in succession. And then the crepe myrtle here, which will bloom in the summer. But right here in front of me, this is the horse chestnut. And it is just now beginning to bloom. So you can see this one's doing quite well. The one right here starts at the bottom and works its way to the top. You can see this one here not really blooming yet, so they'll come out and be really pretty in a week or so. Now, I thought maybe I might be able to show you this rose. It's a beautiful rose that came close to dying. This is the one that it was 8 years ago when the house sold. They opened this fence up and just put one of those roll-off trash things on top of all of these plants. And this rose was totally crushed. And every year it gets better. And this looks like an absolutely spectacular bloom set. And you can see over here more and more blooms. This is going to be a spectacular year. And this is the flowering almond. You can see he's all spent and he's leafed out now, but his flowers are all dry and done. And I have planted a couple of pots on either side of my walkway here. We have a supertunia that probably I've probably planted them far too heavily, but we'll see what survives. And a plectranthus, and I really like the plectranthus. It has a beautiful purple veins and the leaf, and I thought they'd be really pretty with that petunia. And we'll see if the coleus can survive. I may dig out one of those. As things get bigger, I may pull out something, but I've got the two of them. And these were old pots that I had. They're very heavy concrete pot, but they were very dark. And so I got out some chalk paint, as you can see here. And I just very carefully went in and painted them and wiped it off. I didn't want it to be solid white, but wiped it off and then have planted it. And of course, I like it because it has a little fleur-de-lis on it, which carries through on my French theme for my home, my little French cottage. And here are some more of these horse chestnuts. The blossoms. Ooh, there's a pretty blossom here. And now, last week this did not have anything on it at all. This is my clethra right here, which has a wonderful, interesting bloom. And tucked within it, I didn't plant this, and I have never seen this before. I have a volunteer clematis, and it's a beautiful clematis, and it may have been something that was just putzing along, and now it's really, really pretty. Huh. Really pretty bloom. A little more of the Star of Bethlehem. And here are the azaleas in the front yard. So there is Big Red, which is probably a bush that's probably about 60 years old. It's maybe even older. It's definitely an older bush. And here is my rose. We severely cut it back this fall, and it is covered with blossoms. And once this starts to bloom, it will bloom nonstop, clear until Thanksgiving. Here are our irises, which will bloom in a very short period of time. And over here, two more azaleas. Now this one's a pretty standard kind of pinkish azalea, but back behind it, this is what's interesting. This is a deciduous azalea. It loses its leaves, and then the deciduous azaleas tend to have more of a yellow blossom. So let's see if I can, okay. Oh, see if I can zoom in a little bit on that and give you a little closer look. And here is another stand of Spanish bluebells. This is a pretty spot here. We have our large, bright, I don't know what color to call that. I don't know, that's a hot pink, kind of a azalea. And then a little more purpley pink. And then our neighbor's, that's a light pink. So a lot of azaleas in here. Here, the close up on the Spanish bluebells. And here's the tail end of the white lilacs. They are definitely spent. And if you look back between the houses, you can see the yellow potentilla, really in bloom. And I'm going to show you something that's coming up. I just saw it today for the first time. This is the mountain laurel. And this is one of the most interesting blooms I've ever seen. It starts off as these tiny little specks, and I'll show it to you as it progresses so you can see what's going on with it. And lots of hostas back in here, and there's a weed. And our ivy, which is quite invasive, and a beautiful fern back in there, right? Guarding the air conditioner, and very important in a month or so. And look back out towards the front. Hopefully you've enjoyed the stroll through the garden, and I'm so glad you were able to join us, and I hope that spring is heading in where you are. And if you've enjoyed the stroll through the garden, be sure to give us a thumbs up. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye-bye.